welcome to this, to everyone here and online across the globe, different time zones, to this Agrarian Change seminar and webinar. It is, as always, organized by the Journal Agrarian Change and the Department of Development Studies here at SOAS. And I'm Jens Lerche, both from the journal and from SOAS. I'm also joined by my co-organizer, Ahmed Shah, online, where he is in charge of the online screening of this. Ahmed is from the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. Today, I am welcoming Zeynep, Ceren, who is also from the ISS as our speaker. Zeynep is a postdoctoral visiting scholar at the ISS. She has a PhD in sociology from the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, and her PhD focused on gendered rural transformation in Turkey through a study of women peasant workers' working practices and experiences in paid labor at a large-scale export-oriented greenhouse in Western Anatolia. So it comes as no surprise, perhaps, that her research interests include gender, agri-food relations, migration, women's labor, and the politics of neoliberalism. She's published a number of articles and book chapters, including in Journal of Peasant Studies, not yet in the Journal of Agrarian Change, but I'm sure that will come. The title of Zeynep's talk today is Syrian Refugees as Agricultural Laborers in Turkey, Reflections on refugee-host relations from a labor perspective. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session, and all that is left for me to say before I hand over to Zeynep is that we are recording this session. So if you do not wish to be recorded, don't turn your video on online. And if you're sitting here, of course, that is slightly more tricky, but we will not focus in on anyone in the audience. So, and that is all. Over to you, Zeynep. Share screen. Is that working? Can you see the presentation? Good. Right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. I'm so happy that I'm here to share my work with you. Today, I am going to talk about the interconnections between the migration dynamics and ongoing processes of agrarian change in the case study of Syrian agricultural laborers from Eastern Mediterranean region in Turkey. I am particularly interested in how the daily encounters or interactions, attitudes between refugees and hosts are reconstructed through their particular labor position in the rural labor market in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And I also prioritized experiences and perspectives of the each side. And I also questioned gendered migrant labor and its further implications on refugee and host relations. So this research based on a Whole-COMM project, mainly exploring the integration of post-2014 migrants in small and medium-sized towns and rural areas from a whole-of-community approach. Let me talk about the case study and the methods that I use. So this is Eastern Mediterranean region. Due to the anonymity reasons, I cannot just point which tent areas or which cities I focus on, but Mersin and Adana are the two biggest cities in the region. So it's the case of displaced Syrian agricultural laborers, and I mostly employ qualitative techniques, research techniques, including participant observation, semi-structured interviews with Syrian agricultural laborers, as well as different local actors, such as members of local governments, from municipality, from district governorship, small farmers with village headmen, NGOs and INGOs, employer organizations, labor associations, some journalists and villagers in 2021 and 22. I also conducted focus group studies, like 4 focus groups. First 2 were with agricultural laborers, but from different groups. First one was Syrian female agricultural laborers. Second one called Urfalılar, workers from Urfa, Arabic-speaking female agricultural laborers. And the final groups were composed of female villagers living next to the tent areas. And I also made many informal interviews with local actors. Briefly, the introduction of the participant. So there are 11 semi-structured interviews with agricultural workers. All of them are Syrian under temporary protection. This is their migrant status, which I'll be talking in a minute. They are aged between 20 to 62, 7 males and 4 females. They were all married with kids, whose numbers vary from 2 to 11. They were mainly from Raqqa and other cities of Syria. Interestingly, or not interestingly, the majority of them originally used to live in rural areas in Syria. They were dealing with agricultural production as producers or laborers, like them as agricultural laborers. They had a very quiet level, low level of education. 2 men were married to more than 1 woman, and their average duration of stay was more than 7 years. So shortest one was 3 years, while the longest one was 13 years. When it comes to the focus groups, the first 2 female laborers focus groups composed of middle-aged women, mostly very married with children. They had low-level education and lack of Turkish and Syrian focus group, while they were very limited Turkish in Urfalı group. Those from Urfa. And the other female villagers focus group, again composed of middle-aged women. They are from different ethnic religious compositions. They have higher levels of education. A majority was small producers. There are only 3 landless households in the sample. Before going into details of my very preliminary findings, and I also forgot to say that this work is in a progress, and I'd like to hear your suggestions and comments. Really, I'd like to give some information about legal frameworks and contexts, mainly about their temporary protection status, which leaves them in limbo. So in Turkey, there is from the beginning, there has been a very national and centralized understanding of migration management, which leaves little room for local maneuvers. There are 2 important regulations in this sense. One is temporary protection regulation, which was passed in 2014, ensuring a range of rights to the beneficiaries of temporary protection, like access to health, education, social assistance, psychological support, and access to the labor market. But this access to the labor market was regulated in more detail in the regulation on work permit of refugees under temporary protection in 2016. So according to this regulation, you need to wait 6 months after your registration date, and your employer may make an application on behalf of you to obtain a work permit through e-state portal, and he or she also has to pay some fees, and he or she also has to give minimum wage and social security. However, even though the existence of such regulations, the lack of labor market integration policy and coordination with local authorities led to isolated and ignored rural areas in Turkey compared to the urban areas. And the regulations are not that effective when we see the number of work permits, for example, between 2016 and 19 is only 132,497 work permits are given by the ministry. If you think that there are more than 2 million Syrians in Turkey of working age, this is nothing, and this is formal employment. It means that 1 million Syrians are working informally under precarious working and living conditions, and 45% of Syrians under temporary protection are living below the poverty line. What are the implications for labor market and in the next slide for the housing market? I'd like to also give some information about it. If you want to work in agriculture or husbandry, you have to have this exemption certificates. But there are some bureaucratic difficulties if you want to do that, such as requirement on making an application from province where applicant is first registered. So if you are registered to some city and you want to work in another city, then it's a problem. And it's also like the temporary, it's also like the work permit, the one I just mentioned. You need to wait 6 months after your registration. So within this 6 months, you are expected not to work formally. And this is a question, what is going to do you and your family? As this is a formal employment in agriculture and husbandry as well, your cash assistance schemes are cut if you have these certificates or if you have formal employment. But number of beneficiaries of ESS and emergency social safety nets in Turkey or conditional cash transfer for education, the number of the beneficiaries of this it's almost like 2 million, it's 1.625. And each person in the family is paid €2.5 per month. Maybe it's not too much, but they are extended families, and each member in the family gets this amount of money. And if you are a family of 10 or 15, then it's something. That's why people have this fear of becoming more financially unstable if they have a formal job and they avoid from formal employment. And basic social rights, there are also questions about basic social rights. For example, the right to the pension in Turkey or Syria is still a question. So people are questioning the benefits of formal employment or kind of certificates or work permits. And finally, it's such a huge informal market, so no severe control by authorities if refugees have certificates in the fields, or the intermediaries who gather workers for the employers are formally registered to Turkish employment agencies. So the intermediaries and the workers that are all informal and unregistered. And a few words about housing market in Turkey. No public policy to regulate housing for migrant populations. No social housing, no rental aid. And beside, Syrians under temporary protection are not eligible for buying houses, means like eternal tenants in Turkey. That's why they have been dispersed from the beginning throughout Turkey based off their own priorities, like abundance of jobs, abundance of relatives, families, leading to highly concentrated migrant populations in certain metropoles and provinces. Here you see some numbers from some cities like Antep, Hatay. You see Syrians form like 17% or 16% of the population. It's really dense. And these two cities, Mersin and Adana, are from Eastern Mediterranean region, and their population like 11% or almost 9% in Adana. That's why recently the Minister of Interior announced the concentration plan in 2022, so-called to fight with ghettoization and the segregation of refugees. And according to this plan, foreign nationals will not be granted residency in locations where the number of foreigners exceeds more than 25% of the local population. So accordingly, more than 1,000 neighborhoods in 62 cities in Turkey now officially closed to new registrations of foreigners. Of course, it has like devastating effects on Syrians' housing patterns, closed neighborhoods to registration, increased rents, and it has pushed forward Syrians to tent areas in Eastern Mediterranean case especially. Let me briefly talk about the main characteristics of Eastern Mediterranean region. It's a very special place in terms of global agri-food relations. Historically, one of the first regions in Anatolia articulated to global capitalist markets. And we now see the expansion of export-based agriculture in fresh fruit and vegetables. The cities that I mentioned, they are the number one in Turkey. A year-round agricultural production in those products, and that's why there is availability of the jobs. And we also see the expansion of greenhouse production. It's a very small size ownership, less than 10 hectares in Mersin, less than 20 hectares in Adana. The majority is like this. However, we also observe very dramatic implications of neoliberal restructuring and deepening commodification in the region. You see the picture of cotton. It's called white gold, used to be called white gold in the region because it was so profitable for the small producer households, and for most of them was a source of upward mobility once. But according to the neoliberal politics, because of the neoliberal politics, there has been this change on the production design from cotton to fresh fruit and vegetables production, as well as greenhouse production. So we see gradual separation of small farms from agricultural production. We see the growth of wage labor, diversified in the households, and decrease of cultivated lands. Within this framework, labor is so significant because we also withdrawal of unpaid family labors, especially in the harvest time, and enhanced by export-oriented production, which is like race to time. You have to pick that products before they get bad. But again, we see high informality rates. What was the labor force before the arrival of Syrians in the region? They were Kurdish IDPs, internally displaced people, Arab IDPs. They were the dominant labor force, especially after 1990s, due to the civil war between Kurdish guerrilla forces and Turkish state army. Of course, before that, they were also economic migrants, and they were also agricultural laborers in the region, but the war, it just accelerated their numbers. And Keder and Yenal conceptualize their becoming dominant labor force in the area, like forced displacement and dispossession by force, because when their villages are emptied, then they lost their lands and animals. So they become the dominant labor force under very precarious working and living conditions. And we also see it's also the historical characteristics of the region, the critical role of intermediaries who bridge workers and the employers, but at the same time reproduce the exploitative relations. And they cut their commission from workers' daily wages. It's really high in this region, it's 10%. They continue to being intermediary for the Syrian agricultural laborers too. And when it comes to the hosts, they are Nusayri people, Arab Alevi community, Kurdish IDPs from southeastern regions of Turkey, besides Arab IDPs, and pre-nomadic groups like Turkmen and Yuruk. The beginning of the story. Syrians, they started to be seen in the fields like 2012, 2013, and agricultural was an entry point for these people, and they came in massive numbers as seasonal agricultural laborers. In the beginning, they had this language barrier and limited social network, naturally. That's why they work for lower wages and they work in worse working conditions compared to other groups, worker groups. But the high informality and intense use of women and child labor, they were the common features that they share with other worker groups. What was the source of tension in the beginning? It was about conflict and competition over wages or work opportunities. So the civil society an interview with civil society organization, he explains this. The employers did not want to raise daily wages, and the Syrians said, okay, we can work for half of these wages, because they had to acquire that position in the labor market, and they got it. It was like they fought for it and they got it. And a narrative of a Syrian agricultural laborer just confirmed that, saying our daily wage was cheaper in the beginning. Turks were taking more than us. It was 25 for us, 34, 35 for them. Same now. But I learned everything. I can speak Turkish. I couldn't speak Turkish before. I didn't know what 1 or 2 meant. Now I know everything. When we first came, they fooled us a lot. And he is also talking about that intermediaries still had to pay him. So there, like the first 4 or 5 years, the wages were really stagnant, like very little increase every year. And Syrians were the scapegoats for the others, and they blamed for it. It led to rising hostility and social tension in the area. So what is their contemporary conditions? We see there are different positions Syrians take in the rural labor market. The majority, like maybe 90%, work as agricultural laborers, but there are also these families working as farmhands or watchmen. And this is a more secure position compared to laborers, because you get your monthly payment. Sometimes the landowner gives you a house to stay. So your conditions are a bit better than the others. We also see the sharecropping in the region. It's on the rise, Syrian sharecroppers. But what is not changing is the lack of social rights, like unequal power relations with the intermediary and the employer, an intense use of child labor in the agricultural labors especially, and double burden of women and girls. Wages are still depressed in hierarchical rural labor markets. Now it's almost 15 euro, but this is also nothing, kind of under high inflation in Turkey and the super devaluation of Turkish lira. It's just so little. And as I was told in the fieldwork, the differences in the daily wages based on ethnic origin and gender, some agricultural work still persists, but not as wide as used to be, but not equalized yet. What happened to the others? I mean, the other Kurdish or Arab labor force. We see they are displaced with the Syrian labor force. So they are they've gone back and forth between other informal sectors. Some special Kurdish workers moved to construction sector, for example, again in daily jobs. Some of them have become intermediaries themselves instead of being laborers. It is also said that some irrigated agriculture started in Urfa region, where majority of the workers come from. So they stay in their houses to go to the agricultural work in Urfa. But there is this problem in Turkey. No one knows how many agricultural workers. No one knows how many of them are Syrians, how many of them are the ethnic, gender, age, desegregation. We don't know, we don't have these statistics. So we can say that they have been integrated to the informal rural labor markets. Some says it's adverse incorporation. Other scholars say it's differential inclusion. And some say precarious integration is a bottom-up integration strategy of Syrians themselves. Now, this is just a picture of an intermediary card. So you collect this card. This is for women, by the way. You see the roses on it. This card, you collect this card every day you work, and at the end of the month, you just go and hand over to the intermediary, and it he calculates how many days you work, and that he gives you the payment for the month. So I know it's a huge slide full of sentences, but I just wanted to share how they explain their working conditions, working experience. So the themes like child labor, being a refugee in the agricultural work, precarious labor force, low wages, they are full-time indebted, lack of standards on daily wages. First two belong to the same person. He is the father of the household. He is handicapped because he cannot work. But his 14-year-old son works as agricultural laborers, and he says it's a shame. Actually, he shouldn't be working. He gets tired right away. He leaves at 7 in the morning, returns at 5 in the evening. When he's back, he goes to bed right away. And then he continues that they actually do not want to be insured, because when they insured, they are paid less. So they are refugees, according to him, which means they will go to Syria when everything is solved there. So they just don't want to be part of the system in Turkey. They just want to make more money to be able to live in more humane conditions. And the others complaining about whatever they do, it doesn't matter, it won't be enough. Even if they earn 10 euro per day, then it's again not enough for the expenses of the children, the money for bread. The rent, for example, it's not possible for these people to rent a flat in the peripheral neighborhoods in the town. Those who don't work here go hungry. There was no such thing in Syria. We were not working in Syria. The good thing is just because we are safe here, talking about Turkey. There is no security in Syria because there is war. Life is so hard in Turkey, everyone has to work. And the other one is complaining that I always have that. It's not enough. Mine at almost 5,000. Syrians have markets here. We get it from there and we owe them. I want to talk about a little bit on the spatial segregation, which is embedded in their labor position. So they do not reside in the villages. In the past, in the beginning, I was told that few Syrian families used to live in the villages, but after having some disputes or some troubles, now they are not kind of allowed to enter the villages. And even though there are many empty flats or houses in the village, for example. No one rents to the Syrians. It's just the general attitude of the villagers from the area. So the tent area approximately where I focus on, there were 150 tents. Maybe you can see from the satellite image, yeah, it's they are lined up along the water channel of the General Directorate of State Hydraulic Works, because it's a state land and they don't give rent. That's why they choose, and also it's close to water. That's another reason for them to settle down there. But of course, it's far from public places, far from district center, far from hospitals, markets, and schools. And it's very precarious housing, actually, lack of infrastructure, lack of clean water. The water running through the channels are used for agricultural production, so it's they use it to cook their food, they use it to take a shower, but you cannot drink it, it's not a clean. There's no electricity, there is no sewerage, and if sometimes in other examples, if you settle down in a private property, like somebody's field, then you pay the rent determined by the landlord, the producer in the area. So they were actually making fun of this, living next to this polluted water canal. So they got through the COVID times so easily because maybe they were the first one who got the COVID. We don't know who, we don't know. Our children are constantly getting sick because of this. We have always lived side by side with the virus. We also see, I observed the tents are numbered and I asked why and who did it. They told me that it was the gendarmerie for the observing criminality in the tent areas. So they just enumerated the so rising tendency residing in the tent areas due to impoverishment, decline of their economic power, discrimination against Syrians who are so crowded for a flat. So they are not wanted in the peripheral neighborhoods. They are also poor neighborhoods in the district center, but they are also forced to leave the neighborhoods. And experience of pogrom, especially because of this, happened in 2017 in one of those poor neighborhoods. There was a huge instances and they were forced to leave their houses. And two of the interviewees were from that neighborhood. Syrians' houses were burned by locals or Kurdish IDPs. It's not a clear story, but it's clear that they were forced to leave the neighborhood because of the security reasons. So Pelek says we see the rural ghettos in the region. This is because of the availability of a year-round jobs, so they do not move back and come back to the region, but they are stuck in the region in these tent areas. But also because of the reason that I just mentioned, they cannot live in the peripheral neighborhoods. And here are some pictures from tent areas. You see they are just lined up along the water channels and tents that are safeguarded by pieces of rags. And they did it on their own because they are so afraid of children falling down or animals drowning. Garbage collecting, for example, this is not a regular thing. You see the open electric cables on the ground if the tent area has electricity, for example, or they have this solution like sun panels for energy. Sometimes intermediaries just bring some generators, but then you have to pay for it too. And you see the enumeration of tents by the gendarmerie, this one. What is it from women's perspective, what are their thoughts, migrant women labor point of production. They all underline their increasing work burden and hardworking living conditions in Turkey when they compare it with their previous position in Syria. It's like increasing work burden. And actually, the sustainability of the household's economics highly depends on them and their labor, but their work is undervalued and underpaid. They are talking about these reproduction tasks, cleaning, childcare, cooking, baking bread, fetching water, elderly care, removing corn kernels at home for pocket money, subsistence husbandry, and they also say it takes too much time than it would take in a conventional house because there is no electricity, there is no water, clean water, and long working hours. By the way, they are laborers themselves. They are working as agricultural laborers, and when they are off, like two different lives emerge in the tent areas. One for men, one for women. Men take rest, women they are dealing with the reproductive tasks. So they are keeping working all the time. Long working hours and living in faraway tent areas made it impossible for them to access the public places in the district center. Women's mobility is more restricted compared to men, can be husband or father, as women always require a male's company in order to go for shopping or to doctor and the like. Some women said they were just like that in Syria, so nothing changed in Turkey, but it was their kind of habit or established gender codes are significant in shaping the mobility, and therefore they are also effective in regulating the social relations with other groups in Eastern Mediterranean region. Again, many women and their voices. So they are complaining about they have no option but to work. We work, but we hardly make ends meet. And one woman from Fox Group study, there is nothing to tell you about my life here because everything is same, every day is same. We live the life of an old age. We wash our clothes by our hands. We cook our meals by making a fire. We cannot even drink cold water. No electricity, as you can see, no washing machine. We only have hot water if we heat it by burning wood. If you want to take a shower, to cook, to make bread, there is no ready hot water. You should see this place after 5 p.m. It means that when the workers are back from the fields. Everywhere there is fire, everywhere there is smoke. So this is the fourth one is about these established gender codes. She says, I can't go beyond that bridge. There is a bridge next to the tent area, but this is how we got used to it. I can't go. I can't even go to town district. My husband should be with me. I'm not going alone. I feel not comfortable. Otherwise, they let me. Finally, they also say, we leave in the morning and come back in the middle of the night. We cannot take care of our children because it's girls' responsibility to take care of babies or toddlers, just to make mothers work in the fields. This has to be the biggest pain in life because we cannot take care of our children. So in some, when they evaluate the refugee-host relations, I observed that there are different alliances based on ethnicity and religions. For example, Syrians from El Hasaka, Raqqa, and Arab-speaking Turkish citizens from Urfa tend to live together or tend to have more social contact. But Syrians from Kurdish regions like Kobani and Kurdish people from Eastern Turkey, for example, live together in the peripheral neighborhoods in the town district. So there are these kind of divisions based on ethnicity and religion. In the tent area, they live next to this Urfalı group, and Urfalı group support supports the Syrians in daily life problems. They are companies to Syrians to make translation to doctors, to state offices at the local bazaar. I also observe high women solidarity. They like cook for each other. They take care of the disabled persons in the tent areas, for example. They take care of sick people instead of each other. We share the same life. They say the same conditions here in the focus groups, for example. They say it a lot. But they don't have any contact with the villagers living next to tent areas. Very few interviewees mentioned that they had good neighbors while they used to live in the flats. So they have this kind of connection, but not with the villagers. So it again differs in terms of gender. Men do not involve in male socialization, like traditional coffee houses in the villages. They do not go there. But those working as watchmen or farmhand, they have different experiences. They are more involved in social relations with the locals. Maybe because they are seen more permanent or more secure by them. I am not sure. They say they prefer to stay inside and only making visits to neighbors within the boundaries of the tent area. So inside means inside the tent area. They're like micro universe. There. Very few interviewees mentioned that they had visited a well-known public park in the town center, where the locals also spent time. So when compare it with their previous lives in Syria, they feel that they have very limited mobility in the tent areas in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And they also evaluated that their relations with locals evolve in a negative way, and they feel the hostility of locals, and discrimination is on rise, especially in public transportation, at work with other agricultural laborers, and at hospitals with the locals. There are many disputes and conflicts. At work, we argue a lot. They say when we first came, for example, they employed very few workers, about 10 people work for 1 man. Now the man employs 200 people. These are maybe Kurdish workers or Arabic-speaking workers. And we respond as follows, we as Syrians. You had 10 acres planted, now you have 100 acres. This is a win-win situation. We get what we work for. Why do you exclude us? Some agree with us, some don't. So with the Turks, when we first arrived, it was fine. But then we started having problems. Turks tell us their salaries have been reduced because of us. That is what they say. I mean, they say this during our usual chats while we are working in the field together. They just said during the conversation. When it comes to the other side of the story, let me begin with the small farmers. It is this God sent you to us. A farmer said it to describe how perfect was Syrian laborers for him to continue his production. But they are at the same time, they say we are the last farmers. So underlying the inability to deal with the implications of neoliberal restructuring. So rising costs, unpredictable markets, inefficient subsidies and the like, they are thinking of quitting agricultural production. And they feel like they are the last farmers, last generation of farmers in the villages who deal with agricultural production and husbandry. Under this framework, of course, Syrian labor force was appreciated a lot by these people, since access to cheap migrant labor utilized as a strategy by small farmers to compensate disadvantages they have already experienced. And they have no intimate source relations with the groups of Syrian workers, but there are some who are more close, especially if they hire them as watchmen or for their properties growth or fields, then they can have a more, how to say, lasting social relation. An interview with a small farmer, he said the arrival of Syrians to the working class in Turkey, meaning working class in agriculture and husbandry, up a notch. Now the people from our village, locals, who go to agricultural work have started to dislike that. Our people here say, do not equate us with the Syrians anymore. Now they are distant to agricultural work. But now it's difficult to find workers in the village. There is no one left in the village anymore. Now everyone migrates to cities. The rest are always large farmers or those who deal with both animal husbandry and agriculture. Those who make monocultures with a single product are now leaving. The rest is those who are in a very, very bad condition. They are also, he is also saying that they are like producing vegetables at very small size land. And they are thinking, oh, okay, maybe we won't be doing it in a few years. It doesn't save costs. Even the labor costs in this case of Syrians, for example, seems to be very high. If it continues like this, for example, Syrians will gradually go to the city, following the farmers, producers who already migrated. This is actually a bad situation, it says. When it comes to the local government members, which is composed of municipality and district governorship, I observe ignorance. It is common, but with different reasons. First of all, no struggle against informality, which shapes the integration of the Syrian refugees into agricultural production by the local authorities. It's just neglected. It's just a quite normal thing. Syrians are not seen as different group to target when dealing with the problems of seasonal agricultural laborers by the local authorities. So there were some projects, some campaigns, for example, to improve their working and living conditions, but it was not the case for Kurdish IDPs, and it's not the case for Syrians. So ethnic dimension or migrant dimension, it's just the state doesn't see that, and as well as local authorities like municipalities. So they actively play a passive role. Means not developing integration policies. But as I just said, with different motivations, even though the governorate and the municipality come from different political affiliations. Municipality addresses the blurred category of temporary protection. So it's temporary, but it becomes permanent in this case. So they don't know how to deal with this kind of migrant status. And they are also complaining that they don't have budgets or human resources to deal with the Syrian refugees' integration to the labor markets. On the other hand, they just ignore the informality for the sake of minimizing the total cost of agricultural products and underlines that this is a state reflex. So, interview with the deputy mayor, he says, you need to determine the legal status of the person. As a municipal management, we are also confused because of this temporary and permanent thing when it comes to Syrians. We have no integration activities. For example, the municipality doesn't know how many agricultural laborers, what's their basic socio-demographic characteristics. They don't have this information. And also they are saying that we are still dealing with the integration and harmony of our own people, pointing at Kurdish IDPs. The employers who exploit Syrians say that they should stay here. They want them to stay because of their cheap labor. I don't know how much they earn. Like, they don't know whether their wages are equal to the locals or fair, but we are really having a problem. Yes. The district governor says, as the state, we know this, that Syrians working informally, but the state doesn't want to look there. The state says produce at low cost. This is how it is. In this sense, we must adapt to them, like to how Syrians work in informal or in precarious conditions. I always say that without them, vegetables and fruits wouldn't come to our tables. Without them, they would be very expensive. So, for example, without these employees, the industries would stop in Turkey. This is the same statement that ministry in Turkey said. They are the backbone of several industries in Turkey, like textile or manufacturing. So without them, they would stop. We are in this situation here as well. We also see Syrians' precarious labor position is used to ease the social tension between Syrians and the locals. This is then quotation from an interview with an officer from Provincial Directorate of Migration Management. And he is responsible of harmonization activities. Maybe you know Turkey, the official discourse in Turkey doesn't use integration. This is harmonization in Turkey. It's different from integration. It's kind of based on mutual understanding of the host and newcomers. And it's voluntary, unlike integration. Definition, but he's like here sharing the details of a meeting that he regularly organizes with different stakeholders. At the end of the meeting, we ask citizens that who want their children to be a shepherd or seasonal laborer. Nobody was willing. They want their kids to be a lawyer or a doctor in the future. However, there is this issue they always complain about. They are taking our jobs. Well, let's pretend that you're an employer and I'm the worker. You are telling me as an employer, you will work for at least 12 hours, sometimes 14 hours, under difficult conditions. Your health and safety at work is not important. I also want you to work without insurance, because otherwise it will be a burden to the employer. So normally everyone looks for such a worker. It's the ideal worker. That's why I'm saying none of you would work, but Syrians work. So the precarious labor position, it's just used to ease the tension between the Syrians and the locals by a very street level bureaucrat who is responsible for harmonization in the province. When it comes to the labor associations and their perspectives, I see contradictions in the labor. Based on an interview with the labor association, whose composition privileges intermediaries as members, while excluding Syrians both as intermediaries and workers. And Syrians, they're not represented as members in labor associations, which is actually in line with the study of Erdoğdu, who focus on trade unions' responses to the Syrian labor force in Turkey, and she found that at the confederation or federational level of the unions, there is this solidaristic discourse against the Syrians and more inclusive attitude towards them. But when you go to the down layers, when you talk with the workplace representatives or the union members, they are actually against Syrians' work in their sectors, and they want them to be regulated in a more strict way. It's kind of similar here. So there is no obstacle for the Syrians to access employment. We try to prevent them from organizing in our association. For example, we said to the governor that we certainly do not want Syrians working as intermediaries or drivers in our area. We say that 5-6 Syrians are enough for a team. Others should be locals, because otherwise they cause problems when they are numerically superior. So that's it. There are no barriers at this point for them to work in agriculture, but we are trying to put the barrier that doesn't exist. Female villagers' perspectives, here based on focus groups conducted with women from 2 different villages. are closely located to tent areas. Women, they are talking about many things at the same time. First, they are talking about agrarian change processes, like they witness in their village depopulation, lack of interest in agricultural work, especially in younger generations, and migration to the town. And they are making jokes of themselves, like we are farmers in the morning and city dwellers at night, because there are many households who produce in the village during the day, then go to their houses in the cities at night. And they compare and contrast different worker groups like Kurdish IDPs and Arabic speaking peoples, and they found the previous ones more reliable because they used to turn back to their places of origin when the harvest is finished. But the Syrians, unlikely, they seem permanent to women. And this is overlapping with frequently mentioned stereotypes. Syrians are traitors because they left their home country, they didn't fight to ISIS or whatever. They are thieves, like stealing their money and things. They are inherently immoral people, so it's in their nature. And the implications on their daily lives, it's not positive according to them. Syrians have established a separate world there in the tent areas, like a separate village. They only go to a grocery store. They don't have time to have a relation with us. And besides, they don't know our language. So in a sense, they acknowledge that the work burden is so high, so heavy for these people. But at the same time, they are complaining because they are total strangers. And if you come, they are saying to me, if you come, we will rent you a house in the village, but we won't give them a house in this village. We used to walk to the town center. Now there are so many foreigners pointing to the Syrians. We can't walk. Final points for conclusion, if I have time left. Yeah, okay. So we see local government members, street level bureaucrats take the advantage of their disadvantaged position in rural labor markets to regulate and control refugee-host relations. And via that, they guarantee kind of implicitly motivate informal cheap labor force in the agricultural production and favors agricultural producers, exporters, and consumers. Their labor position comes with certain special organization, which further segregates Syrians from other groups of workers and villagers, like Pelek said, in rural ghettos. And their cheap, flexible, vulnerable labor, migrant labor, is a fundamental factor in restructuring in agricultural sector, compression of labor costs, resilience of small, medium-sized farms squeezed by neoliberal globalization. And it's evident that it's a class-based integration of Syrians. But I also wonder that, like a question, are we at the end of the limitation? Are we at the end of this remedy, Syrians' labor force? Does it have limitations now because farmers are already suffering and suffering more? And nuanced understanding of labor positions reveals subtle differences on the refugee-host relations. And I think there's further research needed, especially for the sharecroppers or taking more permanent jobs, and if it leads to more permanent, like long-lasting social relations with the locals. And it's also important gender codes underlining different socialization practices of men and women, and further implications on their relations with the host groups. Thank you for listening, and I'd like to hear your questions.
Thanks so much. Okay, thank you. Can we go full screen again? Ahmad?
Yeah, your full screen. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
But I think your screen is turned off.
Okay. There you are. Thank you. Just one thing while we rearrange here, can I sit here as well next to you?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Zeynep, for this so expansive and hugely interesting and quite detailed presentation. I really thought it gave a good understanding of both the agrarian change and the role of labor migration, of refugees, and of migration upon migration, and refugees on top of refugees, and so the detailed picture that we were dealing with here, and how the different groups slotted in the agrarian change that's going on, how some managed to move to the cities and therefore become part of another labor force, and others then had the job of being at the bottom of the labor hierarchy in the countryside, obviously the Syrian refugees, and the extreme conditions under which it happened. So we're now opening up for a discussion, and I'll just put a couple of questions to you to start it off. But basically, we take questions both from the floor here, also from online, and people that are online can also write in the chat any questions that they may have. But just a couple of questions here, if I may, to start you off. The one that struck me was the one you put as well. So are we seeing the end of small-scale farming? Your argument seems to be that it's only possible within the neoliberal setup, the market-based setup, if you have extremely cheap labor, on the one hand. On the other hand, you're also saying the farmers, many of them are already now no longer living in the countryside. So what are they doing apart from from running these farms where they employ Syrian laborers? Is it in a sense a sideline to other occupations than they have? So are we already seeing farming being also, for those that own land, being so downgraded from being the main income source? So further understanding of this, of the change that's ongoing, I thought would be really interesting to have. Another sort of area is the labor relations, of course, which you really, I think it was great to also get information on the labor unions, how they articulated the interest of different ethnic groups and oppressed different groups and denigrated different groups, or the Syrians in particular. The one thing that really struck me there was that you said that they organized the intermediaries. So could you say a bit more about the intermediaries? What is their role? And I think they were mainly Kurdish internally displaced people. So where are they the old labor force that has managed to become intermediaries? And so can you accumulate as intermediaries, or can you just survive? Or what is that position? Why are they in the unions if it is a labor union? It's so a better understanding of that would be really interesting. And final sort of point that there are many more points, but one that really struck me was the abject poverty that you described for the Syrian refugees, and particularly when you mentioned that in one of the vignettes that we are all indebted to the market traders, and then you said they're Syrian market traders. And I thought that was really interesting as well. So are there different groups of migrants from Syria that slot in a different class space, and some being Syrian market traders? what is their, so is that because they come in capital? Why are they in a different group to the Syrian agricultural laborers? So this is just, you don't have to answer all these questions, but it's just to start out, if you will take one or two of them and talk to them, then we can use that to start the discussion. Thanks. So please, why don't you just answer question two?
So regarding the first one about is it end of small scale farming? Well, it's not easy to answer, but I can talk about some tendencies or trends in the Eastern Mediterranean region that I've been observing for a while. So I see these households have diversified their labor use. So the income from agricultural production and husbandry is not primary income anymore for the small scale producers I'm talking about. Because there are also middle size and large scale farmers, and the story is totally different for them. So these households, like as I said in the presentation, the withdrawal of the unpaid family labor, dissolution of unpaid family laborers in the households, and losing significance of agricultural and husbandry-based income. Of course, they affect their future prospects and plans. So the villages and the city town districts, for example, they are not so far away from themselves, from each other. Some of family members, they allocate their labor to agricultural production. Some in the city taking like formal jobs, and I also see the rising importance of wage labor, and this is a kind of side income coming from agricultural production and husbandry. If you don't have a large land, if you don't have so many animals, then you don't make any good profit in this sector. Now, what will happen to the agricultural workers? They will be working for these middle size or large size farmers. They will work for greenhouse production, which needs extreme manual labor. So they are not like very modern or high-tech greenhouses. They based on manual labor. So they will shift maybe from this kind of producer to other middle and large scale farmers. When it comes to the intermediaries, actually they are not only Kurdish IDPs, they are from every ethnic and religious origin. They are also local intermediaries. There are women intermediaries. It's a very historical fact of the region. Of course, the number of displaced intermediaries increased due to the war and their fleeing the region because of the war. But they are so powerful, but not only in the exploitative sense. They also protect the workers, for example. If the producer doesn't give the money as he or she promised, then it's the intermediary's responsibility to do so. So it is really the workers need to trust in the intermediary. It's a kind of in-between position. So it's interesting. There are now, unlike the beginning, there are Syrian intermediaries, for example. Yeah, but I really don't know detailed information about it. So what are the implications when the intermediary is Syrian or Kurdish IDP, especially on labor processes? And they are more organized than the laborers themselves, and this is not an union that I presented. It's not a trade union. It's an association to protect workers who are employed in a insecure conditions. It's like the Association for Insecure Workers, something like this, and it includes not only agricultural laborers but like those workers who work in the package facilities. For example, there are many in the region as it's an export-based region, and they are deliberately against Syrians in these intermediary associations, because if you're a driver, you get 30% more than a normal daily wage, for example. So it's also a fight for economic gains. And regarding different Syrians from different classes, maybe it's not right to say that they are agricultural laborers for long terms, or it's not a fixed position. So these families, if they accumulate, for example, they are planning to move to the district center in a flat. But if only if they accumulate, they can save some money. They are, so it's a like a Syrian community living there. Some dealing with small business like groceries, like small cafes. Others work in construction, in not in textile in this region, but in industry, for example, in ateliers, unregistered workplaces. So the informality is like a common thing, even though it's a different sector.
Fine, thanks. Let us continue with questions. Enrique.
First, thank you very much for the presentation. I also enjoyed it. I think it was lots of detail. So I have two questions. The first one is related to some of the quotes that you showed. There was one saying that, of course, here in Turkey, if you don't work, you go hungry. And then you show another very similar from a lady, I think, that here in Turkey, you cannot stop working or something like that.
Mm.
So that sort of points to the very intense commodification of subsistence there in Turkey, but it also suggests that the livelihoods that they were forced to live due to the war were somehow easier or less commodified, I suppose. I would like if you could expand on what those livelihoods were before in Syria. So that's one. And the second one is about small farmers. So you also sort of suggest that they are losing out with the current arrangement and the process of grand change. And it seems to me the one very important question for politics is to understand how these people that are losing out sort of frame the entire situation. So I would like to know if you could tell us more about how they perceive these changes. They see that modern agriculture and connections with global markets, it's something that has potential, instead like this narrative of progress still dominant, or do they actually see it from a more critical perspective as something that is highly exclusionary? Yeah. I don't know, how do they make small farmers? Yeah. Thanks.
If you answer that, and Steve, yes, I have noticed. I've noted that you have a question. You're on the list. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot the first question. You
The
were saying
livelihoods they were forced to live in Syria.
Okay.
Apparently, those were easier, judging from the comments. People suggesting that they didn't have to work that hard.
Yeah. They repeat it many times compared to this labor regime now they have experiencing in Turkey in this region. So there is a job availability for whole year, and you can find easily jobs because agriculture is the main entry point for these people. So they compare it with their previous lives in Syria. They were maybe more easy working schedule there. I do not I don't know actually, but I know that they were working as agricultural laborers, but maybe in a different labor regime. And they were also small producers dealing with cotton, so they were able to organize their own work schedule. But here it's kind of slavery conditions for these people. Yes, you can find so easily jobs because there is no qualifications. Nobody is making a job interview with you. It's just nobody looks at your even papers if you are official or if you have ID or not. But then you have to work for 12 or 14 hours a day. You are not sure if you are paid at all at the end. And your health or job security, it doesn't exist. Yes, you can work, but under these conditions. So if you compare with this and the previous slides, maybe, yeah, there are differences. And the second question was, again?
Perception, small farmers, how they perceive
Okay.
changes.
Okay. No, they are not like very fond of this modern, okay, it's the new generation agriculture. No, they are kind of aware of that they are losing this fight. And it's like supermarkets just eliminating the groceries. They feel like that. They also think that maybe it's too late for them, like for the farmers that I talked to, because they say now we are over 40, and which occupation can we learn after this age? So we are just confined to this. We are stuck to the this kind of production and making no money out of it. Say just one sentence. I don't think that they do not understand their value as producer, because it's a very strong myth in Turkey. Like peasants are the masters of the country. So whether you are small scale or large scale, you are producing kind of food that feeds people. So it's not a welcome. They are not welcoming. They do not like this change, of course. I think they would prefer to be able to make profit again from the agriculture and not to be a public officer in the town instead.
Okay, thanks. So we have one question on the chat, which is actually slightly tricky to answer, which is Yildiz Atasoy, who says, thank you, Zeynep. Would you please share your references one more time? And that can be slightly boring just to give a long list of references, but if you can talk to the literature, maybe that could maybe be one way of doing it, as opposed to simply list references. And after that, we'll go to Steve.
Actually, I can share with you, Hocam, I know her.
Yes, okay, so Yildiz, you
Okay,
will
Hocam,
get
no
the references separate. Great. How was it?
Yeah,
Excellent.
I can share.
Yeah, let us go on to Steve. Steve, please.
Thank you very much indeed for a really interesting seminar. One of the things that struck me is how throughout you didn't mention the word mechanization, which is fundamental to where these labor relationships are the absolute dominant features of how. Seems to me you're describing a process of industrialization of the rural sector by a labor-intensive method because of the status of the refugees. And that leads then to a point which Jens made, is because you also described the process of smaller farmers going out and this petty production, things like that, then who are these landowners who now don't have equipment as well because they've got cheap labor? Who are these people? Are they industrial urban-based people, and this is part of a portfolio of industrializing the rural sector with a labor-intensive method in this case, because you mentioned the issues around mechanization haven't come up for you.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. I totally agree with you. Actually, mechanization was a part of my presentation, but then I just took it out because there were many things and I was a little bit afraid of just disorientation. Of course, it was an important part of the labor processes because the cotton, as I mentioned, was based on manual labor, and then it was mechanized. So it was a huge difference, between before mechanization and after mechanization. But the change, I think, it was also so effective in regulating the labor relations, because the change in the crop composition, I mean, from cotton to fresh fruit and vegetables, whether in the soil or the greenhouse production, has many implications on labor relations. Then there is this availability of jobs during whole year. Before it was not like this, because after they harvested the cotton, they used to go back to their homes or go back or move to other agricultural zones in Turkey, like hazelnut, like many other agricultural products due to the nature's timeline.
Thank you. Any further questions? Paolo?
I mostly raise my hand to say thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I mean, coming from this, not from an agrarian change or studies perspective, I mean, what I really love the presentation is how, from a labor perspective, the refugee-host categories that are foundational to refugee studies, on one side kind of cease to matter, decomposed and recomposed. On the other side, instead, they matter immensely, in the sense even in your narrative and in all the answers that you provided. So, I mean, thinking about questions from that intersection, the first and most immediate one was one on intermediaries, and indeed that's a point of contact between the two. You kind of covered that. I had more questions, but I'm gonna go in different directions, still having those intermediaries in my head. The first direction is to think about what is the real value of those intermediaries. I mean, what is really their job? Because you just said that, look, it's very easy to find jobs. You just need to endure the day and be happy to be paid very little. So it doesn't seem that their value is in the recruitment of refugees, right? But I really don't understand, what do they intermediate, right? What prevents these refugees or Kurdish IDPs to go to the employers, or for employers to set out, I don't know, go with a car as they do somewhere else, and to an informal labor pickup point and recruit directly. So what do they do really, and why are they central to all of the narrative? And the second question is more tangential and perhaps more related to my research. I was really struck by these tent areas, as you called them. And also by one comment you made at the beginning, as in the refugees chose to go there because it's government land, because there is water. But experience from elsewhere tells me that very rarely you can really occupy land just like this. And I suppose that there are other intermediaries, other relations associated with the exact location of those tent areas. I mean, beyond the marginalization, of course, but you can achieve marginalization in many ways. So I'm trying to think about how did they get there in the first place? And I have other questions, but we'll leave them for later. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Okay, their job is the intermediary's job, basically to collect workers for the employer. But of course, there are many agricultural work and this abundance of work you can just, but then you are not that reliable. You need to be a part of one's team. You don't know employers, you don't know producers, you don't have this network. These people have this network and they have their word. These are my workers, and I assure them, I guarantee you that they finish this harvest. So it's my responsibility. So there are different like emotions, social constructs, of course, at the table. Why did they choose to settle down there? So of course, if they are not, this is not a free will, or they are not freely moving from one place to another. Mostly they are forced, they are exiled from one place to another because of the tension with the villagers, because of the negative attitude of the village headman. This is also, I think, the missing part in my presentation. I also give a place because then it was too much, but they have a very critical role because they organize the spatial dimensions of who lives where, the proximity, the rent sometimes. So they are very at the center of power relations next to intermediaries, the village headman. I can say that. So it's not an invented place for these people. Before them, other workers used to live. So these places like next to channels, known as tent areas, known as workers' places. So it's not a surprising thing, for example, for a local to see tents just next to the water channels. It's nobody wants to live there, and it's like free of charge because it's. But of course, the state doesn't look at the area too, because otherwise it cannot guarantee the cheap labor just close to the fields. So they kindly let these people live in this dust and under precarious.
It's a housing policy.
It's the housing policy, yeah, lack of housing policy and housing policy at the same time.
Very good, very good. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, and we also have got a couple of hands here. Let's go to the chat and hear the questions there first. Ahmad, would you mind telling us about the
Yes, there are a couple of questions also seeking some clarification from Judith here and Bridget O'Loughlin. I'll just quickly read them out, and then Judith, Bridget, if you also want to chip in and ask something, please feel free to unmute. So the question from Judith says, this is a familiar story of exploitation because of the precarious status of refugees. But what is the difference between migrants and refugees, and what are the numbers and changes over recent years? It sounds as though there have been Syrian migrants for some time, and the growth of refugee labor must be larger and more recent. So that's the question from Judith. And the question from Bridget says, you've told us so much, but there are things I don't remember from your quotes. It sounds like many women and adolescents are doing the low-paid, unskilled jobs. What is the relative share of Syrian male household heads who are doing these low-paid, precarious jobs? Yes, please, Judith.
Please. I think she wants to add a question.
Okay. Judith, you are mute. You're still mute, sadly. Yes, you're there now. You're mute.
Okay, sorry. No, sorry, I just wanted also to link that one up with Steve's question, that the other thing, I'm just missing a sense of timing in all of this. The growth of this larger scale horticultural sector, moving on from cotton and the other crops and so on. I wonder how far that's related to the influx of refugees and the fact that there is now so much cheap labor. Because it's this, I have this sense that in the long term, there's probably been some migrant labor from Syria, but the influx of labor with the war, the refugee labor, has obviously transformed the situation in a very major way. And I wonder if you can link these things together. Thank you.
So the migrant status of Syrians in Turkey is defined as a temporary protection. And if you are someone and looking for international protection, then your status is refugee, according to the laws. So now the majority is temporary this temporary protection status. But if they want to be a refugee, their applications are evaluated by the authorities to be resettled in a third safe country. But this is not the case for the majority of these people in Turkey. So the question regarding the change in the production composition or mechanization, yeah, as I just told, the main product in the region was cotton, like known white gold, and was a kind of resource for upward mobility for many small-scale producers, and it was a really profitable product. But due to the neoliberal restructuring and the change in the neoliberal politics, there was this change in the crop composition from cotton, like from labor-intensive products to the capital-intensive products like fresh fruit, export-based fresh fruit and vegetables production, and especially greenhouse production. So when it turns like this, then there are many agricultural works during the day. So nobody needs to leave the region to go to somewhere else to take another agricultural work in that specific region. So you can stay in the Eastern Mediterranean region without any further move, and you can work as agricultural laborer during the whole year. So that was the difference between the previous times and the present.
Any comments to Bridget's question?
Maybe maybe there is some misunderstanding, because both women and men work as agricultural laborers. They are working together in the fields. But when they are done, when they are back from the fields, I just said there are like two different worlds for men and women. Women start working again in their reproductive tasks like house chores, cleaning, cooking bread, and etc. But men spend time in a different way. They get socialized. Sometimes they go together to the town district if they can. So this is different from these two genders.
So the paid work is the same, but
yeah, unpaid work
comes reproduction afterwards.
No,
and that is women's job here. Well, seen before. So we have a couple of questions here from in here, and it's like 8 minutes to 7, so we are approaching the end of the seminar. So let's take those two questions together and see if there's time for more or not afterwards. Gaurav.
Thank you. Thanks for the wonderful, brilliant presentation. Thanks for painting out the picture so clear for us from different perspectives. I have 2 questions, but I think I'll just ask. I'm equally intrigued by this class of intermediaries, and you've mentioned what tasks they provide. I was wondering if what incentive do they have to represent the workers? Do they take a cut from the workers? or like what is the relation between the intermediary and the refugees? And the second thing that while you presented so many relations very clearly, the one thing that I found is a bit unclear to me is the relation between the farmer and the laborer. Like you mentioned, I think if I understood correctly, that they don't pay them wages but only a card at the end of the day. Is there any non-payment of those cards? Are there any conflicts between the laborers and the farmers with respect to that? And is there anything that they ask them to work for more than like 8, 10, 12 hours if they need that card? Like what are the relations between them and the relation between laborers and intermediaries to the take cards? So just that. Thank you.
Thanks. So that's one of the questions. Suraj?
Yeah, hi. Very interesting presentation, Zeynep. Yeah, so my question is also linked with Steve and Judith, and also I think Bridget was asking about the sense of mechanization and the labor process. So we do hear a lot from your presentation in terms of the labor relation that arises from cheap labor and sort of, they being a refugee. But I was wondering, you mentioned that there was a mechanization of cotton. So what was the time period when that happened? So, and secondly, what do you mean by mechanization of cotton? Because cotton is still picked by hand, even today. You cannot mechanize it that way. Processing of cotton is mechanized, and it has been mechanized for last 40 years. So it's nothing like different in terms of that mechanization. Yeah, so, and then you also in your, abstract, you say that you are trying to understand the relations through labor processes. But what we understand different labor processes, but we do not understand how through those labor processes, what Gaurav was saying, with the relations between laborers on an everyday basis. Are there new sort of emerging alliances and certain sort of social relations that comes as a support system to them or something?
Interesting questions, but before you answer, we'll just throw one more question at you from the chat.
Yeah, this one is from Yildiz. It says, could you comment more on the gendarmerie's numbering of these tents? How does this relate to how does this practice relate to the state policy of making these people more legible, and the significance of this in terms of the state and Kurdish relations?
Goes in slightly different direction, but please, you've got these questions here. If you will have a go at them, please.
Yeah, just a few for each question. So, the relation between refugees and intermediaries, they cut from each worker 10% of the daily wage. So when you have a larger team, then you make more profit. Then you have small team, it doesn't make any sense. But these cards are so interesting because they are also like credit cards. You can go to groceries and buy food, for example, via the help of this card. And at the end, again, the grocery owner and the intermediary are in contact. Then they can calculate what was the consumption and what is left from daily workers' payments. Second question. Do you have second question? Yes. What one?
No, the farmer and the laborer, is there any conflict involved there when it comes to payment of those cards?
Yeah. In the beginning, of course, in the beginning, when they had a language barrier, when they had very limited social network, I was told that there were many cases that they were not paid at all. As in the one just sharing his experience, because he didn't know the language and he didn't understand that he was fooling, the intermediary was fooling. But this is at the same time like not a good thing for the intermediary himself, because he must be reliable too, not the workers only, but then he has to keep his promise. Otherwise, the workers, like kind of collective action, they are leaving the intermediary to find another intermediary for like a better payment or more viable, secure livelihoods.
There's no bondedness between the intermediary and the worker. Like the worker can leave an intermediary and
it's not a like chain relation, so you can find another intermediary. So regarding the mechanization, as far as I know, the mechanization in the area is about the harvest, like picking up cottons. But the thing that it was not the mechanization that shifted producers' direction to these new products. It was so the shift like occurred in 1990s. I mean the neoliberal policies were very effective, but the producers' withdrawal from cotton occurred in 2000s when the state withdraws from cotton production. So they just decreased their subsidies, they just decreased their supports, and it was the most like detrimental thing on the small production, cotton production.
Second part of the question, relations between workers.
After mechanization.
So within the workforce.
Within the workforce today, are they competing with each other? What's the relationship?
Yeah, there are some alliances and there are some competitions. But for example, we don't see what shoemakers in other cities do. Like they are organizing collectively against the lower wages pushed by the producers or pushed by the employers. And there are Syrian shoemakers and local shoemakers like Kurdish Arabic shoemakers. So they came together in several cases in Hatay and in Izmir, in 2 different cities. But we don't see such kind of collective action in agriculture, not yet. Maybe we will see because, I don't know, the political movement.
And there was the last question in the chat. Sorry for taking this release.
Yıldız Hocam. Okay. So these gendarmeries numbering of these tents, the tent area that I focus on in my research was composed of Arabic-speaking Urfalı people and Syrians only. So there were no Kurdish people. They were all separated. So I am not sure if their tents are also enumerated by the gendarmerie or not. So I cannot give you an accurate answer in this issue. But I was told by the participants that the gendarmerie did that for the sake of security and enumerated each fence in the area.
Yeah, there are always layers, other layers that can be explored.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we will stop here. And thank you for the presentation and for the deepening understanding of the relations that you have provided also through the question and answer session. So thanks so much. And of course, thanks to everyone that have taken part here and online. And I should say, this will be our last Agrarian Change seminar webinar for this term. So we will welcome you back when we start our next round. But for now, it is goodbye. Thank you.